You've probably gone through this before. Just one offhand remark, a distant look, a seen message with no reply, and your whole day feels restless and uncomfortable, as if the other person is holding the remote control to your emotions. A criticism from your boss, being ignored by your friends, a disrespectful act from a family member. They all seem like tiny touches on the surface, yet somehow they have the power to spin your mind for hours, sometimes for days. You don't actually want to live like that. No one wants their inner world to be so fragile that a single frown from someone else can stir up a storm inside. But how do you stay calm in the middle of all these collisions? Is it really as simple as just ignore it and don't think about it? According to Carl Jung, emotional freedom doesn't come from avoidance or suppression, but from understanding and mastering your inner world. On this journey, every time you feel upset because of someone, it's not a failure, it's a doorway. In this article, we'll revisit those familiar irritations through the lens of Jungian psychology and turn each moment of irritation into a lesson in becoming calmer, steadier, and less easily disturbed by others. In each section, you'll find small, simple yet profound practices to help you discover your own way to stay at peace, no matter who you are dealing with. The root cause is within you. Before we talk about any techniques for staying calm, we need to return to a foundational truth that many people spend their whole lives avoiding. Most of your anger does not begin with other people, but with what was already inside you. It's uncomfortable to hear, but if you don't accept this, every tip like "don't take it personally" or "just let it go" will be nothing more than taping over a wound that hasn't been cleaned. Think back to, or imagine, a very simple situation. Your boss gives you feedback that your presentation was not convincing enough. That's all they say. Your colleague hears this, takes note and adjusts their content. You hear the same words, but spend the whole day feeling anxious and useless. And at night, your mind keeps looping. "I'm not good enough." Same sentence, two completely different inner worlds. The difference does not lie in the boss, but in the place inside each person where that sentence lands. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The unconscious here is not some vague, distant thing, but the beliefs, fears, memories, and wounds you carry without ever really naming them. When someone says or does something that hits the spot, it is precisely those unconscious regions that are stirred and erupt into intense emotion. Stoicism has a very accurate saying, "No one can hurt you unless you allow it." It sounds powerful, but if you've ever tried not allowing it and still ended up in pain, you know the truth. The statement is right, but not complete. The deeper question Jung asks is, why do you allow it? Why is there a part of you that still hands over the power to decide your mood to someone else's words, looks, or attitude? Here, Jung doesn't just tell you, don't pay attention to it. He asks you to look into the mechanism inside. Within you, there may be a child who is always afraid of being judged, a part of your personality that must be perfect, an old wound from being compared or abandoned. These parts crave recognition so much that a single small comment can trigger the feeling, "I am not worthy." You don't allow this with your rational mind. You allow it through unconscious patterns that were formed a long time ago. If you don't recognize this mechanism, you'll easily fall into two extremes. Either you keep living in a state where other people are constantly pressing your buttons. A slightly colder partner makes you lose sleep. A friend forgetting a meeting makes you feel unimportant. Or you force yourself to be tough. Learn to need no one. Cut off your own emotions so you won't be hurt again, while inside remains a nameless emptiness. Neither of these is true freedom. In Jung's view, negative emotions are not something to get rid of, but signals. They are like warning lights on a control panel. When they light up, they are not the enemy, but a reminder that something here needs to be looked at. Every time you explode because you're ignored, feel wounded because of criticism, or feel small because you've been compared, it is not just a story between you and the other person. It is an opportunity to ask yourself, what fear lies underneath this reaction? What belief about myself is being exposed? So instead of only asking, who made me angry, you can try shifting to, what inside me has just been touched? When your partner doesn't reply to your message, does the feeling of being abandoned come only from this moment? Or does it also carry the weight of all the times you were left alone in the past? When your parents say, you're still not as good as other people, are you only angry about today's sentence, or about an entire childhood spent striving just to be acceptable? This new question gently moves the focus from them back to me, not to blame yourself, but to put you back in the position of the one who understands and cares for yourself. This is why this lesson is so important. If you don't understand the inner cause, every attempt to stay calm around others will be an act. You can smile while your hands are clenched. You can stay silent while your mind is screaming. Only when you look directly at the motives, fears, and wounds that are driving your reactions can there be real space for peace to appear. And if there are too many unacknowledged things inside us, they will not simply disappear. They often choose another path to show up, through the very people who irritate us the most. Those people, in Jung's language, are holding up a mirror for us. Right now, we're going to look more closely at that mirror, at what he calls the shadow, to understand why certain types of people and behaviors always trigger you so intensely. Method 1. Recognizing and integrating the shadow. When you start to realize that your emotions are not only created by other people, a question naturally arises. What parts inside me am I still not really willing to look at? This is exactly where Carl Jung's concept of the shadow comes in. In Jung's understanding, the shadow is all the traits, emotions, and desires within us that we don't want to acknowledge, so we push them down into the unconscious. The shadow is that hidden, repressed for the most part, inferior and guilt-laden personality. It's not only made of bad things. The shadow can also hold strengths, boldness, and aspirations we were once taught we were not allowed to have, because we don't want to see it. The shadow rarely appears directly. It chooses a more subtle path. It steps out through other people, those who irritate you, the personality types you can't stand, the behaviors you harshly judge, are often touching a part of you that you haven't yet accepted. The other person is like a mirror, unintentionally reflecting what you don't want to look at in yourself. Let's try a familiar example. You feel annoyed by a colleague who's always talking about their achievements, constantly finding ways to show everyone how good they are. Every time they open their mouth, your body tenses up and your mind fills with judgments. If you sit quietly with yourself, you might discover that deep down, you also long to be recognized, but you're afraid of being seen as attention-seeking, so you suppress that need. Your annoyance now is not only with them, but also with the part of yourself you haven't allowed to exist. Do you remember the movie Good Will Hunting? Will is highly intelligent, sharp enough to call out anyone. But the moment someone touches the sensitive areas of his past and wounds, he explodes and pushes them away. His sarcasm and defiant attitude are not true strength, but the way his inner shadow, full of fear of abandonment and the feeling of being damaged, reacts to defend itself. The shadow rarely says, "I'm in pain." It usually says, "You're wrong. You're not worthy," so that no one can reach the vulnerable part underneath. What Jung suggests is not that we try to get rid of the shadow, but that we recognize and integrate it. when we can look directly at ourselves and say, yes, I do have jealousy, a desire for attention and weakness inside me. The shadow gradually loses its power over us. We no longer have to pour energy into denying it. So our emotions also become softer, less extreme. To begin this process, you can use 3 questions as a small roadmap every time someone presses your buttons. First, what exactly am I judging in this person? Answer specifically, not vaguely. For example, I think they brag too much. They always want to be the center of attention. They're irresponsible. They only think about themselves. This question helps you name the thorn in your eye, which is precisely the content your shadow is projecting onto others. Second, where in myself has this shown up, or still shows up, even just a little? This is the hardest step because it touches the ego. But this is where the shift begins. When you dare to admit, yes, sometimes I also want attention. I've dodged responsibility before. I've put myself first too. You are pulling a piece of the shadow from the unconscious into consciousness. The very moment you acknowledge, I also have this part, the intensity of your emotion often drops by half because you're no longer standing on the pedestal of the completely right person handing out judgments. Third, what is this emotion teaching me about myself? This question keeps you from stopping at discomfort and instead turns it into information. You might realize you're lacking self-recognition and need to learn how to honor yourself instead of only waiting for others to do it. You might see that you've been trying to live too correctly, too rigidly, to the point where you can't tolerate anyone who lives more freely than you. Or you might recognize that you're still being driven by an old wound you thought had long since healed. If we compare the shadow to a roommate living in the dark, then the more you ignore them, the more they act out to get your attention. Every time you dare to sit down, turn on the light, and ask these 3 questions, you are sitting down to talk with that roommate. At first, it may be very uncomfortable, but gradually you'll find that you understand yourself more and soften toward yourself. And once you become gentler with yourself, you no longer feel the need to be so harsh with others. One small action you can start today is to dedicate a page in your notebook to a shadow journal. Every time someone upsets you, instead of just venting outward, write down 3 short answers for yourself. After some time, you'll clearly see repeated patterns, the types of people, behaviors, or comments that always trigger you strongly. That is the map leading to the deepest parts of you that are waiting to be heard. When those parts are named and embraced, you'll realize something very precious. Other people are still the same, but the impact inside you is no longer the same. They may still brag, still be clumsy, still lack tact, but inside you, there is no longer the same inner earthquake. You see more clearly what belongs to them and what is really your own inner story. Even so, understanding the shadow and talking with it is only half the journey. The other half is learning not to react immediately every time you get triggered, no matter what is happening inside. That is where a very subtle capacity comes in, the ability to create a pause between the moment you are provoked and the moment you speak or act. In the next part, we'll go deeper into the reaction gap, that small but powerful space where you truly have the power to choose your response instead of just replaying old habits. Method 2. Reaction gap. When you begin to recognize your shadow and understand why certain people hit you so hard, another question naturally arises. Now that I know all this, how do I stop myself from exploding in the moment? Seeing what's inside you is a crucial step, but in real life, everything happens very fast. One sentence, one frown, one blunt text message, and your body is already heating up, your heart is racing, and the comeback is right there on the tip of your tongue. That's why, beyond self-understanding, Jung also emphasized the ability to create a small pause between stimulus and response. We can call this the reaction gap, a subtle space that lets you avoid immediately chasing your emotions and instead gives you just enough time to see them before you act. If working with the shadow helps you understand why you react so strongly, the reaction gap helps you choose your response instead of being dragged along by habit. You can think of the reaction gap like the pause button on a remote control. The movie is still playing. The sound and images are still there, but you stop it for a moment to see things more clearly. Emotions work the same way. The anger is still rising. The hurt is still there, but you don't rush into the role of the one who acts. You move into the role of the one who observes. Jung once wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." When you shift from being in the role to observing, you begin to step out of automatic mode. A beautiful illustration of the reaction gap is Atticus Finch in the novel To Kill a Mockingbird. In a setting full of tension, prejudice, and collective anger, he does not react immediately, does not shout back, does not sink into the emotional chaos around him. He stands there, listening, looking closely, then chooses his words and actions calmly and clearly. He is not numb, but he also doesn't allow himself to be dissolved into the storm of the crowd. That is the power of the pause. Close enough to feel, but far enough to choose. In practice, you can treat the observer protocol as a simple exercise to cultivate the reaction gap. When you notice yourself heating up, aching inside, wanting to respond immediately, try this. Step 1. Pause for 3 seconds and take a deep breath. You don't have to stop being angry. Just send your body a signal to pause. Breathe in and notice the sensation of air entering your chest. Exhale and feel your shoulders drop a little. Step 2. Observe the emotion as an outsider. Instead of saying, "I'm losing it," shift to, "There's a lot of anger in me right now," or "I'm feeling really hurt." This language change seems small, but it helps separate you from the emotion. You have emotions. You are not identical with them. Step 3. Ask yourself, how do I want to respond so I won't regret it? This question pulls you out of the heat of the moment and into a near future where you've cooled down. It reminds you of the person you want to become, not just the person you are when emotions are in charge. The idea of a gap between stimulus and response was echoed by Stephen Covey when he summarized Viktor Frankl's thought. Between what happens to us and how we respond, there is always a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. The reaction gap is that space, but here we see it through Jung's lens. To have true freedom of choice, we must begin by becoming aware of what is happening inside us, instead of letting the unconscious drive us. The important thing is this: the reaction gap is not about shutting emotions off. You still feel angry, sad, or hurt. The difference is that you give yourself a few seconds to see the emotion before letting it steer your actions. You move from "I am this anger" to "there is anger in me. What am I going to do with it?" That tiny shift is exactly where peace begins to spark. You can try applying this in very ordinary situations. Your partner sends a message that makes you feel disrespected. A family member makes a mocking remark. A friend shows up late without telling you. Instead of responding right away, pause, breathe, look into what you're feeling, and only then choose your words. Sometimes, just that one beat of slowness is enough for you to speak differently, or even decide to stay silent while the storm is still too strong. If you practice this regularly, the reaction gap will stop being just a technique and become an inner habit. You naturally step back half a step before reacting, and once you can pause and observe, you'll start to see something else. Some emotions and energies don't actually belong to you, yet still pour in and leave you exhausted. At that point, beyond the pause inside, you'll need something more. healthy boundaries to protect your psychological space. In the next part, we'll explore the boundary fortress, how to build a layer of protection that is gentle yet firm, so others can no longer storm straight into your inner world so easily. Method 3. Building a boundary fortress. After you've learned to pause before reacting, you may notice something else. Even if you no longer explode like before, other people's energy, emotions, and words still seep in and wear you out. A whole day can go by, and you feel like a sponge, soaking up everyone's frustration, anxiety, and expectations. At that point, the reaction gap alone is not enough. You need another layer of protection, inner boundaries. In our psychological life, boundaries are not about building cold walls, but about knowing clearly what is allowed to enter you and what must stop at the gate. You cannot control what others say or think, but you can learn to control how deeply those things get to touch you. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Boundaries are how you shift from living in constant reaction to the outside to living from a clear, grounded inner axis. You can picture inner boundaries like a water filter. The water flowing in from outside is always mixed with many things: praise, criticism, expectations, pressure, anger, fear. Without a filter, all of it flows straight into the emotional reservoir inside you. With a filter, you gradually learn to keep what is truly nourishing and let the impurities pass through. A simple way to understand this boundary fortress is to divide it into 3 layers. Layer 1, relevance filter, filtering what truly matters. This is the first boundary layer. You ask yourself, is this really important to me? Does it help me understand more, grow more, or does it only make me more confused? Not every opinion, comment, or emotional state of others deserves to be carried in your heart. When someone makes a shallow remark, you have the right to let it fall to the ground instead of taking it home, opening it up, and thinking about it all day. Layer 2, ownership boundary, knowing whose emotion it is. The second layer helps you distinguish. Whose emotion is this? Other people may be angry, disappointed, anxious, but that does not mean you have to feel the same. A boss who is stressed out can say harsh things, but most of that storm belongs to their inner world, not yours. Inner boundaries are the ability to say to yourself, they are sad, angry. I can listen, but I don't have to carry all of that as if it were my own. Layer 3, identity fortress, a healthy sense of self. The deepest boundary layer is a clear sense of who you are as a person, where you're headed, and what values you choose to live by. When you have a strong inner spine, praise won't make you float away, and criticism won't make you collapse. You can still learn from feedback, but you don't equate your worth with every sentence that others say. At that point, external judgments are like wind blowing past a tree that has deep roots. It may sway, but it is hard to uproot. Many successful figures in the world have spoken about the importance of setting boundaries, including Oprah Winfrey, a famous producer and talk show host. She has shared that a turning point in their lives was not only about opportunity or talent, but also about learning to say no to interactions, stories, and environments that drag them into negative spirals. That is not selfishness, but an acknowledgement of the limits of the mental energy one can carry. In practice, building boundaries starts with very small gestures. Before a conversation you know might trigger you, a meal full of comparisons, a call with someone who often judges, a tense meeting, you can quietly tell yourself, today, I will only keep what truly helps me understand better and become better. The rest, I will let pass. This reminder is like switching on the filter. After each interaction that leaves you drained, instead of only blaming yourself, why am I so weak? Try asking, of everything they said, what was truly useful for me? What was only their fear, prejudice, or frustration that I can give back to them? You don't need to win the conversation. You only need to be clear about what you will take home in your heart. As this boundary fortress is strengthened little by little, you'll begin to notice a difference. You can remain in the same relationships, the same environments, but the feeling of being swept away gradually decreases. You still listen, still feel, but you no longer confuse what is mine with what is theirs. And from that clarity, you can keep your compassion without sacrificing your peace. Even so, there will be situations where your boundaries are tested very strongly, not just by vague negative energy, but by direct attacks and judgments that seem to hit you right in the heart. In those moments, another question starts to arise. Are they really talking about me, or are they revealing something about themselves? In the next part, we'll go deeper into the principle of projection reversal in Jung's thought, a way of seeing that can lighten the weight of attacks that once felt impossible to ignore. Method 4. Projection reversal. When your inner boundaries become clearer, a natural question appears. But what about the times when they attack me directly? What am I supposed to do with words that are truly malicious or unfair? This is where a very important principle of Jung's comes in: projection, and how we can reverse it so we're no longer crushed by other people's attacks. In Jungian psychology, projection happens when someone unconsciously throws the parts of themselves they don't want to see onto another person. They don't say, "I'm selfish, I'm scared, I'm insecure," but they often see selfishness, cowardice, stupidity in you. When someone attacks, judges, or labels you harshly, very often they are telling the story of their own inner world, using you as a screen to project their inner movie onto. Jung once wrote, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses." The more a person cannot accept their own fear, weakness, or shame, the more they tend to condemn those qualities in others. They believe that by throwing it all outward, they will feel lighter. In reality, every accusation only tightens the rope around themselves. And if you don't understand this, you'll be pulled into that tightening loop with them. Reversing projection does not mean denying your own responsibility. It simply means changing where you stand when you're being attacked. Instead of immediately thinking, "I must be terrible if they say that," you shift to the question, what is this person revealing about themselves? For example, when someone constantly calls you selfish just because you set boundaries, it may be that they themselves have never been allowed to say no, so they feel threatened by anyone who dares to prioritize their own needs. When someone mocks you for overreacting, they may have grown up in an environment where feelings were always invalidated, so now they can't stand it when someone dares to acknowledge their pain. You can see this in public figures. Steve Jobs, for instance, was often described as authoritarian, too controlling. Part of that was a reaction to his very strong leadership style. But in quite a few cases, such criticism reflected the critic's own insecurity about power and status. They felt small or threatened, so they needed to call him authoritarian to feel right and safe. We can't fully know the inner world of each person, but we can use this principle so we don't automatically equate every attack with our true worth. To practice projection reversal, you can use 3 small questions whenever someone criticizes you. First, what quality of mine are they aiming at? Name it clearly. Laziness, irresponsibility, weakness, ambition. Second, in what way does this person seem to struggle with that very same quality? Are they afraid of being seen as weak and therefore hate seeing vulnerability in you? Are they insecure about their own abilities and therefore feel irritated when you succeed? Third, what fear or wound might be behind the way they're attacking me? You don't have to diagnose them accurately. You just need to open up the possibility that they're hurting somewhere, and that pain is finding its way out through their words. These 3 questions are not for you to analyze others just to feel superior, but to shift your attention from "I'm the victim being condemned" to "I'm seeing a human being with both wounds and defenses." When that happens, the attack loses some of its weight. It stops being an absolute truth about you and becomes an expression of the inner state they're carrying. You can still reflect on yourself if there is something true in what they say, but you no longer have to swallow the whole package as a verdict on your worth. In psychology, Freud believed that projection is mainly a defense mechanism. We unconsciously attribute to others what we can't accept in ourselves. Jung agreed with this, but went further. He saw projection not only as a problem, but also as a hint. Every time we or someone else projects, it is an opportunity to look back inside and understand ourselves more clearly. If Freud helps us see how much we are driven by the unconscious, Jung adds another step. We can become aware of that and gradually reclaim our ability to choose. A small action you can try right away. Next time you are criticized or judged, before reacting or blaming yourself, pause and simply ask inwardly, are they talking about me, or are they talking about themselves? This question is not meant to wipe away your responsibility, but to remind you that every word passes through the psychological lens of the speaker. You have the right to choose not to let someone else's distorted lens become the mirror that defines your value. When you can see the motives and wounds behind an attack, you'll notice something strange. Instead of only having 2 options, fight back or stay silent and endure, a third option appears, using that very moment to grow on the inside. And that is also the doorway to the next step on our journey, not only defending against attacks, but learning to turn every emotional collision into fuel for inner growth. In the next part, we'll talk about emotional alchemy, how to transform even the most uncomfortable experiences with others into pure gold in your inner life. Method 5. Emotional alchemy. When you begin to see your shadow, understand your boundaries, and recognize that behind many attacks lie other people's wounds, a deeper step opens up. What can I do with all these emotions besides just enduring or avoiding them? Here, Jung suggests a very beautiful possibility, using those uncomfortable emotions themselves as raw material for growth. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Pain is no longer the enemy. It becomes a catalyst." Let's call this emotional alchemy. In alchemy, people dreamed of turning lead into gold. In our inner life, we can do something similar. Transform anger, hurt, and jealousy into understanding, resilience, and compassion. Those who reach a high level of inner freedom are rarely people who have never suffered. They are the ones who have learned to use pain as energy to go further. You can imagine this alchemical process in 3 simple steps. Step 1. Trigger mining. Extracting lessons from your triggers. Instead of only wanting to get rid of uncomfortable emotions, you actively ask, what did I learn about myself this time? Every time someone presses your buttons, you don't just react and move on. You treat it as a data sample about yourself. What am I afraid of? Where am I still stuck? Where do I need to grow? Step 2. Shadow integration. Using emotions to heal the shadow. The stronger the emotion, the more likely it is to touch some dark, hidden part. Instead of hating or feeling ashamed of that part, you turn back and talk to it. What need has not been acknowledged? What wound has not been held? Each time you do this, you pull another piece of the unconscious into the light of awareness, like bringing a dark corner into daylight so it can no longer control you from the shadows. Step 3. Strength synthesis. Turning weaknesses into strengths. Once you understand where you are easily hit, You can turn that area into a training ground. If you are easily hurt by criticism, you can train yourself to receive feedback more calmly. If you are prone to jealousy, you can use it as a signal pointing to what you truly long for. Then act to move closer to it instead of just comparing yourself. Weaknesses don't disappear overnight, but gradually they become the places where you are deepest, more patient, and more compassionate with yourself and others. Nelson Mandela is a very clear example of this spirit. He was imprisoned for many years, subjected to injustice and deprivation. But instead of letting resentment devour him, he used that experience to understand more deeply human pain, fear, and the mechanisms of discrimination. Later, it was this understanding and compassion that enabled him to lead in a spirit of reconciliation instead of revenge. The pain was not erased, but transformed into wisdom and moral strength. In everyday life, you don't need big historical stories to begin. After each episode of anger, hurt, or disappointment with someone, you just need to spend a few minutes writing down 2 sentences. What did I learn from this emotion? And, from here, what strength do I want to develop? It could be patience, communication skills, the ability to self-soothe, or simply learning to leave harmful situations earlier. Each time you do this, you're training your mind in a new habit, not wasting any emotion. Gradually, the people you once put into the category of those who make my life miserable will change roles. They become unconscious teachers, showing you where you need to grow. This does not mean you have to accept every bad behavior. It only means you refuse to let painful experiences be meaningless. You take something from them for your journey, then move on, a little lighter. Once you learn emotional alchemy, you move closer to a very special state. You no longer just want to protect yourself, but begin to have enough inner strength to stay peaceful in the midst of other people's emotions, even becoming a place they seek out when they are in turmoil. That is when the image of the compassionate warrior that Jung hints at begins to appear, someone who is not easily wounded, yet does not close their heart. In the next part, we will explore that final stage of maturity. Method 6. Becoming a compassionate warrior. When you've learned to look at your shadow, create a pause before reacting, build boundaries, and even practice emotional alchemy to turn conflict into lessons, a very natural shift begins to happen. You're no longer only concerned with, how do I suffer less? But start asking a deeper question. Who do I want to become in the midst of other people's emotions? This is where the image of the compassionate warrior appears. It's a state some analysts have suggested from Jung's ideas. Compassionate immunity, a kind of emotional immunity that does not lose its heart. You are no longer easily pulled into drama, but you also don't build walls that make you numb to the pain around you. You are as steady as a tree trunk, yet as soft as a canopy that can offer shade to others. Jung once wrote, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life." Dogma. When you truly accept both the light and the dark within yourself, you no longer need to defend your image, no longer need to prove yourself, no longer need to win every argument. From there, your peace is no longer fragile, and it's precisely from that foundation of self-acceptance that compassion for others becomes natural, rather than a performance of kindness. Think of the Dalai Lama, not from a religious angle, but simply as a human being who has gone through immense loss and injustice, yet still maintains calm and compassion. He is not someone who has never known pain, loss, or unfairness, but when faced with difficult questions or criticism, he often responds with a gentle smile, with answers that are calm and deeply understanding. He does not run away from reality, but he also does not let himself be swept up in resentment. His presence gives the feeling, it is safe here. I can be myself. even when I am in pain. That is the energy of a compassionate warrior. There is strength, but it is strength used to lift others, not to crush them. At this level, your question, when faced with someone who triggers you, is no longer, how do I make them stop hurting me? But gradually becomes, where is this person hurting? Can I stay centered and still keep my heart open? You don't turn yourself into a savior. You simply choose not to react from your own wound, but from the clearer part of you that's been forged through many cycles of falling, standing, understanding, growing. Sometimes helping is as simple as listening in silence without judgment. Sometimes it's saying one honest but gentle sentence. Sometimes compassion shows itself in walking away from a toxic relationship so that both of you stop hurting each other further. A compassionate warrior is not someone who stays in every situation no matter what, but someone who dares to do the hardest thing, to be honest about their own needs while still sincerely seeing the other person's pain. One small practice you can start today is this. Whenever someone makes you storm inside, after applying the previous steps, add one more question. If I see this person as someone who is in pain, what will I notice? And how can I respond so that tonight, when I lie down, I won't feel that I have betrayed myself? This question gently moves you from a defensive stance into the position of someone with inner strength and compassion. As you gradually step into that state, you will realize true peace is not about no one bothering you, but about the ability to live in a world full of collisions while keeping both your heart open and your mind clear. And from here, we now have all the pieces needed to close the circle of this journey. How to stop letting others control your emotions while still keeping your warmth, your humanity, and your inner freedom. In the conclusion, we will weave together this entire path, from recognizing the unconscious, working with the shadow, setting boundaries, all the way to becoming the compassionate warrior of your own life. If you look back over the whole journey we've just walked through, you'll see one thing. The problem has never only been what other people do, but always what you understand about what is happening inside you. Every negative emotion, anger, hurt, jealousy, feeling inadequate, in Jung's view, is no longer something to be ashamed of or thrown away, but an invitation to turn inward, to understand yourself more deeply, to grow a little bit more. The person who makes you angry, the one who speaks insensitively, the one who makes you feel not enough, ultimately, they are like mirrors that unintentionally reflect your shadow, your unhealed places, the old beliefs you are still carrying. When you learn to integrate the shadow, create a pause before reacting, build healthy boundaries, reverse projection, and practice emotional alchemy, those collisions are no longer just scratches. They become material for you to become both stronger and softer at the same time. The goal is not to become someone who never feels anything, but someone who can feel fully without being swept away. Steady, yet still compassionate, with yourself and with others. As Jung said, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. From here, the rest is your choice, choosing to practice seeing your shadow, to pause, to filter what you allow inside, to read attacks as traces of pain, and to turn each time you get triggered into a small lesson on your journey back to yourself. If you're ready, share a little about your own journey in the comments. Where do you get triggered the most? And where do you want to begin changing? And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you can keep receiving content that helps you understand yourself more deeply and live more peacefully in this ever-shifting world.